There are too many of them, Ollie thought, and started to run. If I try to fight, they'll kill me. He recognized the feeling. It wasn't the first time he had run for his life. But one can't get used to this sort of thing. There was a bleeding dog bite on his leg. A whole pack was after him. He sprinted, short of breath, hoping only that he would not faint before reaching the stone fence that stood like a fortress. He managed to avoid a bite and kicked the Carcass dog in the chops. All he had on him was a knife. If he had stopped and stood his ground, he would have been surrounded and knocked down, with no chance to defend himself in the unfair fight. Climbing up, he clung to the edge of the wall and with a last effort pulled himself to the top. There he lay panting, overcome with the intoxicating bliss of knowing he could continue his life. The Carcass dog's ancestors were domesticated pets, friends of men, but the changing environment had turned them into degenerate mongrels. As their name suggests, they were generally feeding on the remains of unfortunate creatures, but in packs they attacked anything or anyone weaker than themselves. Their presence was a sign of the city's decay, a harbinger of society's collapse. Superstition had it that they were possessed and driven by evil spirits, a belief that was perhaps not so far from the truth. It was the evil spirit, the willful blindness residing in the city that allowed them to proliferate, that produced a multitude of unburied corpses to spill out from there. All the lawlessness, violence, negligence and lack of morality and honor that ultimately caused the city's demise. The Carcass dog's presence was an omen too many people ignored. Ollie was strolling down a narrow street, looking for a quiet place. Soon he found a secluded corner where he felt protected. He took a few fish from his haversack he'd caught that morning and started eating them with some bread. Soon a dog was prowling nearby. Ollie assumed it was drawn there by the smell of the fish. Ollie's hatred flared up. Just wait, he thought, and let the scavenger come within arm's reach. You're going to die, you filthy maggot. He kicked the beast hard. It tried to run, but it was at a dead end and Ollie blocked its way. The boy looked around for stones to throw. He wanted revenge. His rage blinded him as if he was looking through a red veil. Ollie's hand stopped in mid-air. He felt sorry for the howling, helpless dog. He stood aside, letting it flee with its tail between its legs. He watched where the frightened animal ran, then started to follow it. The dog headed towards a mountain of garbage. Ollie was really surprised. He realized he didn't want to kill this particular Carcass dog. It belonged to the owner of the dump, who, more than once, allowed the youngster to sort through the garbage. Ollie had seen the pet before, that's why it approached him. He just didn't recognize it at first. He thought he'd ask Zumba to let him look through the discarded electronics and war equipment. Zumba had always been kind-hearted. He lived a simple life. He tried to help people, individually and collectively. He was involved with the garbage dump to make himself useful. The huge amount of waste was slowly filling up the city, because there was no proper infrastructure to remove and neutralize it, so Zumba took it upon himself to do the job. He was warm and caring. Although he longed for it, he himself did not have children, so he was happy to have the company of a young person. Ollie was more important to him than a stranger. Ollie wanted to add some kind of firearm to his meager arsenal. He had a knife, forearm and leg guards. He also had a steel glove. a toolkit, and a small radar. All his tools were on him at the time, but otherwise he kept them in a cave on the beach where he also went to sleep. Ollie wandered fruitlessly among the mountains of wreckage all afternoon. The sun was setting. It was getting dark when he looked around from the top of a pile and saw a terrifying silhouette. He shuddered at the sight, half hoping it was his imagination. As he watched the creature with his mouth agape, a voice in his head screamed, "Run!" But he did not listen. Cautiously, he began to follow Demalochis, the dreaded bounty hunter. The teenager couldn't imagine what the assassin was doing there, why he made his way carelessly towards the residence in the middle of the junkyard. Ollie stalked after him anxiously. Demalochis kicked in the door, grabbed Zumba and started interrogating him about the whereabouts of a person unknown to Ollie. Then, suddenly, he jerked his head to the side, like a wild animal when it senses danger. He let go of Zumba's neck and let him collapse, his attention now riveted on new prey. Ollie ran headlong, squeaking like an abandoned kitten. Dema quickly caught up with him, snatching his neck. He raised his fist. With a single move he could have cracked the quivering boy's skull. "You're going to die, you filthy maggot." The phrase sounded entirely different coming from Demalochis. He didn't mean to kill, he just wanted to scare him. Ollie imagined Demalochis felt the same pity he had not long before. Bullets impacted Demalochis' armor. The bounty hunter turned and positioned himself to cover the child from the direction of the shot. The bullets were fired by Garaphor. He was careful to hit only Dema. If Zumba and the youngster hadn't been there, he would have sent a missile. Ollie glanced at the assailant, who was removing a jump bullet from his gun, then took advantage of the stillness to sneak away, but didn't run far. He was alarmed by the sense of danger, but the urge to witness the clash of giants overcame all common sense in him. He crouched under the protection of the bucket of an excavator, looking intently at the skirmish. He didn't know who Garaphor was. He saw only a figure in armor fitted with orange, a worthy opponent for Demalochis. Or so it seemed for the first few seconds. Demalochis took up a defensive position so he could use the attacker's momentum to throw him in the air. Garaphor, landing with a somersault, slowed himself down and then pounced on Demalochis before he could get to using his ranged weapons. With a dreadful crash, the two warriors collided. Ollie watched in amazement as Garaphor's bulky left reached somewhere under the breastplate and lifted Demalochis. The machine gun on the arm that did the lifting was gradually deforming the vulnerable neck with a stream of projectiles, while the other paw was constantly pummeling the enemy. Dema stopped kicking the air, instead placed his legs on Garaphor's chest and threw himself in the air while firing an explosive charge into Garaphor's shoulder, who spun around and returned fire. They both took cover. Ollie had seen fights before, but never a deadly duel like this. In this first encounter, they tested each other's strength. Now they must be looking for vulnerabilities, he thought, trying to analyze their combat skills. Demalochis leapt forward, blasted the airframe protecting Garaphor, but immediately staggered backwards as Garaphor roasted him with a 10-meter tongue of flame, courtesy of the flamethrower he had pulled from his back. That was a neat trick. The pain hasn't even gone away, yet they can react to it. It's like they see the future. Ollie was wrong. None of the fighters could see the future. Their bodies and reflexes had been retrained to respond to pain by counterattacking instead of flinching. Demalochis had 30 to 40 seconds before his armor was seriously affected by the incendiary material stuck to it, but he needed only a fraction of that. He grappled Garaphor and pulled him close. Garaphor, losing his balance, stumbled forward, clutching the wire that was dragging him. Ollie turned his face away when Demalochis kicked his victim in the head, but still winced when he heard the terrifying clatter of the landing. Poor guy. That must have hurt. He can barely stand up. Garaphor was on all fours, tossing aside a pull ring he had been holding. Ollie screamed when Demalochis exploded. What was that? In a few seconds he figured out what had happened. The object the man in the colored armor had dropped was a hand grenade safety pin. The detonation, however, did little damage to Demalochis' protective suit. Dema stooped on his opponent like birds of prey. Garaphor's armor was giving way with a painful crack, unlike its wearer. Garaphor howled in pain, but kept fighting. He kicked Demalochis off him, rolled onto his stomach to stand up, and with a grenade launcher he drew from his back, shot him twice. Ollie was blinded by the light of the explosions, his ears ringing. The colorful circles swirling before his eyes like frantic hula dancers made it hard to see the struggle that was going on, but he still knew exactly what was happening. Demalochis' opponent was being engulfed by the avalanche of attacks from the unstoppable assassin. Behind Demalochis, Zumba appeared and struck him with a sledgehammer. Them killed him using his signature move, then adjusted his dented helmet. Zumba's death shook Garaphor to the core. His indifference fell away. He could feel he had been badly injured when his armor had been pierced. The rough metal had penetrated through the abdomen into one of his internal organs. Garaphor never imagined he could win. He still fought on, moving, doing his job like the machine that protected him. His wounds multiplied, he lost more and more blood. The armor's electronics had gone haywire, now operating with reduced functionality in safe mode, which was designed to avoid system failure. Demalochis scored. To him it was a game. Garaphor hit the ground with a loud groan. He fired one last grenade, sent a missile after it, and finally sighed in relief. He'd been waiting since the battle began to launch the missile. After absorbing so many blows, even the infamous black armor must have cracked. As soon as Ollie saw the flame of the missile, he ran. These weapons were capable of immense destruction. The bucket he was hiding behind did not provide nearly enough cover. Demalochis not only recognized the missile, he had time to catch it. Holding it between his fingers of his right hand, he pondered. He hadn't done anything like that before, perhaps ever. It is irresponsible to waver in battle. The fight was going worse than he had planned. The flames were now heating his suit to unbearable levels. He feared his instruments were gonna fail him by overheating. How can he keep up the fight? He had never seen such determination in any of his victims. And how is it that I hesitate to kill? He thought of the woman, that cursed woman who had given him the scar on his shoulder and another scar on his heart. She must have bewitched him. Something has changed. I'm not the same. If he hadn't wasted it on thinking, he'd have had time to throw back the missile the way it came. But as it was, the charge exploded in his hand. Demalochis was indeed no longer the same. Ollie was caught up in the pressure wave, slammed to the ground meters away. Bouncing up, he began to gallop towards the exit. He was scared because his view of the world was shattered. He considered Demalochis' invulnerability a fact, yet he saw him explode. He shuddered at the thought that the victor, who might still be able to walk, could see fit to kill him. Someone had caught the nape of his neck. Ollie looked, but didn't recognize her. He didn't understand what the woman in the armor could want from him. What happened in the compound? The voice didn't sound threatening, but worried, terribly desperate. It was Eve, the love of Garaphor and Demalochis. She didn't know it, but the bounty hunters were in a duel over her. Demalochis died, Ollie said, wanting to help. He was killed by a man in colorful armor. Eve let Ollie go and ran on. "You killed him!" Eve spouted the accusation, sobbing. In the darkness, she didn't notice that the child she was questioning had followed her back. Nor did she notice that Garaphor was on the verge of passing, for the hydraulics of his armor held his body upright as if he were unharmed, and the blackened blood betrayed no sign of his injuries. His posture was sound, but it took a great effort to make his voice seem so. "I had no choice," he attempted to apologize. They both heard the pain in his voice. Eve attributed it to guilt, Ollie to the wounds. He listened from behind a rack. He went back because he was ashamed that the strange woman had the courage to enter the yard while he did not. "Was he hired to kill?" Eve asked. "Yes," replied Garaphor, unaware that he had misunderstood the question. "Well, there's always a choice," said Eve sadly, shaking her head. "I have a contract with the Knights of Arkney," she continued. Garaphor nodded. He knew the name. The Knights of Arkney was a semi-official bounty hunting alliance that provided services of all sorts. In this case, to protect her. "I don't need your help," Eve finished. Garaphor shook his head in agonizing bitterness. That sentence hurt him more than his open wounds. He knew he was going to die. He thought mournfully of the missed opportunities, of all the futile suffering and the dreams that never came true. "There's no one beside you," he pointed at her. "I'm glad you're alive." Eve didn't want to argue. Emotions swirled inside her. She knew Garaphor would have died if he hadn't fought. So that's why, she thought, Demalochis had been hired to kill Garaphor. That's why he said he was trapped in the wake of his past. Someone wanted him killed for something he did earlier. It was either him or Demalochis. She could feel the pressure on him, but she was ill aware of what was weighing on him. She was glad Garaphor was alive, but not that it had cost another life. She didn't know what to say, where to start. "We can't be together anyway." Eve couldn't live with murder. She used to believe Garaphor could change, but she realized this wasn't an exceptional case. She saw Gar as unwilling to change. It seemed like he gave up trying to do the right thing. Instead, he accepted what circumstances made him, allowing his soul to be morphed by what happened to him. Very few people can change themselves. "Farewell," Garaphor said, partly because she had left him, and partly because he felt the Reaper approaching, for his pain was suddenly easing. He thought of his mother, the only one who had ever loved him. "Thank you for everything," Eve said. Then she turned back and walked away uncertainly. She looked back after a moment. Garaphor stood motionless. She hadn't realized the two hunters had fought over her. Garaphor wasn't fighting to win her love, he was fighting for her life. Demalochis' last target was not Garaphor, but Eve. Eve, who became a co-leader of Alcreon, was in the way of the powerful man who had earlier sent a different assassin to kill her, even when she wasn't leading the company. Garaphor had protected her that time as well. All three survived the first incident, but this time Eve was the only survivor. Garaphor fell like a tree. Ollie went from one amazement to another. He was completely stunned by the sight of the silently dying bounty hunter, terribly shaken by what had happened. How could Demalochis have died? Everyone knew he was invincible. And here lies this other one. She left him here. Ollie shivered, though it wasn't cold. It must be horrible to die like that. No one cares about you. No one misses you. People sigh in relief, because it won't be you that ends them. He wondered what he would become if he continued on the path he started on. I don't want to die like this. For weeks he was haunted by the memory of the dying bounty hunter, the reality of it shattering his ambitious dreams. He realized he could not succeed either. Because he's not strong enough, not smart enough, because he's an orphan and has no one to help him if he gets in trouble, because he can't get the money for the equipment, because he simply doesn't have the chance to do what he wants. He realized that he was never going to be a Demalochis. And even if he were, a stranger will come along and take his life. Over a long period of time, reluctantly, unwillingly, he came to terms with his fate. The following year, he decided that school wasn't such a bad idea after all. He studied a trade. Then he went to work, had children and grandchildren. He did good for the world. After many years, content with life and satisfied, he set his head down for one final dream. Not so Garaphor, who felt the regret that had haunted him all his life. His strength had left him, his fatal exhaustion draining him even of the energy to be angry with the world. With great difficulty he got on his hands and knees and looked for Zumba to see if he was well. It was only when he found him frozen in blood when he remembered what had happened. He fell to the ground again, remembering the events of the past few days. Demalochis learned that Eve had been here, so he questioned Zumba. If I didn't intervene, sooner or later he would have surely killed him. He would have killed them both. I couldn't let him. At least Eve is alive. Garaphor was endowed by love with the strength to perform the phenomenal feat. He was stronger than me. Garaphor's mind went black for a brief moment. He came to, on the ground, but he didn't realize he had collapsed. One of us had to die. He wanted her dead. I defended her with my life. But how was he overcome? I couldn't have defeated him alone. Zumba and I weren't the only ones holding him back. There had to be something else, or I couldn't have killed him. With a bitter grin on his face, he stopped struggling. I won, yet I must die with him. Garaphor closed his eyes. He let the dark emptiness absorb him. The slight breeze remaining from the storm carried the scent of blood far away. The pale light of the waning moon provided enough illumination to see the sky. The Carcass dogs were gathering. It was a keen observation on Garaphor's part, that he was not the only one who had hindered Demalochis from fulfilling his mission. A much more powerful individual was also opposed to the assignment. Demalochis died not because of her, but for her. The worthy opponent Demalochis had was himself.